What's going on? My name is Francis, and if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell because I post a new video every single day. If you want to become a private client, then consider applying for a free consultation by hitting the website that's in the description box of this video. What we're going to be talking about in this video is how to let go of your ego. Okay, because the ego means different things to different people. But when I talk about the ego, what I'm referring to is unconsciously being absorbed in the thinking without even realizing it. Okay, because a lot of people are completely absorbed and consumed by their mind, and they don't even know that this is happening to them. It's the part of you that's creating all the anxiety in your life, all the fear, all the worry, all the dis-ease, all the impatience, all the agitation, all the discontentness, wanting to be in some other moment than this moment right now. Continually projecting into the past and into the future, unconsciously disconnecting from the beauty and the aliveness of the moment right here, right now. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about how to let go of the ego in this video. Before I get started though, consider downloading the free guided meditation in the description box of this video, completely free. It's going to clear your mind and allow you to detach from the ego. Just hit the link in the description. It's a free guided MP3 meditation to clear your mind and detach from the ego. So letting go of the ego really does begin with awareness of the ego. Because if there's awareness of the ego, it's not the ego anymore. The ego implies a lack of awareness. Okay, because the ego can also be synonymous for the unobserved mind. And once again, the ego means different things to different people, but when I'm using the word ego, it's simply a symbol and a word to represent unconsciously being absorbed in the thinking mind without even realizing it. Because most people don't even know that they're completely absorbed in the thinking. So we call it the ego because it's almost like an external identity that you've created for yourself that you're completely absorbed into. It's almost like this external force, this urge to feed into anger and feed into pain and feed into unconsciously reacting to situations. Because if I was to ask you, like, do you want to feel pain in your life? Obviously you would say no, because there's a deeper part of you that doesn't want to feel pain and wants to transcend pain and pleasure and simply be content with the moment right now. But the problem is that if I was to show you your thought processes that you've been thinking for the last week, what you might find is that the ego actually likes to feed on other people's egos, which usually involves a lot of anger and fear and worry. And so although at a deeper level you don't want to deal with that pain, your actions and your thought processes and your feelings may show otherwise. And this is not your fault. It's the ego. It's the external force, you can think of it like that, that's almost like pulling you in and making you do certain things that you normally wouldn't do. The ego is almost driving you from a place of fear most of the times. The ego is literally driving you from fear. And so what we're doing here is we're learning how to become aware of it and then let that go, because in the awareness of the ego is actually the letting go of the ego, because there's a beauty and there's an aliveness in the present moment where you can simply be the awareness of the ego rather than completely identify with it. And in the identification with the ego is where the anxiety comes from, because it's okay to have an ego, but it's the problem comes up when you're unconsciously identified with it, creating an identity for yourself that is falsely created with the attachment of your awareness onto it. Okay, this goes really, really deep. But what's going to happen is when you can simply be the awareness of your thinking rather than unconsciously being absorbed into it, what's going to happen is you're going to create a separation. There's going to be the thoughts, and then there's going to be you who is aware of the thoughts, and you are not those thoughts. But then when you don't have the awareness, what happens is the awareness and the thoughts completely merge together and there's no distinction there. And then so you literally become your thoughts temporarily in that moment, and you confuse reality for thinking about reality, which is going to make you react to things a lot more. Unconsciously autopilot, these autopilot responses where you're unconsciously reacting to everything. And it's because when you're in that moment, the ego doesn't even, like when you're reacting to things, the ego will automatically just respond without even realizing that it's doing so. And so that's an unconscious autopilot response. If you want to stop living on autopilot and actually fully take control of your life, then letting go of the ego would be the best way. And when I say let go of your ego, what I'm talking about is simply observing the ego. Because a lot of people think about killing the ego and destroying the ego, but the thing is, you need your ego to a certain extent. But the way I like to put it is that you need your thoughts, and you need to use your mind as the valuable tool that it's designed to be used as in life. But most people aren't using their mind is using them. Okay, and when the mind is using you, that's the ego. When you have awareness of the thoughts and you can simply observe the thoughts and not attach to them, now it's not the ego anymore. Now it's just thoughts that you are aware of. Okay, don't confuse this with some kind of objective meaning. Like, this isn't the objective meaning of the ego. I'm just simply using this right now in this moment as a word and a symbol to help you get a deeper understanding of what it means to be unconsciously absorbed in your thinking. What I also could say right now is how to let go of attachment to thinking unconsciously. Okay, that would also work in this context right here that we're using. That's the ego. The ego is the unobserved mind. The ego is unconsciously being absorbed into the thinking without realizing it. The ego is unconscious thought patterns. The ego is thoughts happening in the background that you don't even realize that are happening, that you are attached to, that is making you unconsciously react and project into the future without realizing it. So here's a situation and you're not even noticing the details of the situation because you're so absorbed in your thinking and you're so in your head. That's another way to say it, is you're in your head unconsciously. You're attached to the mind. When you're in your head, you're not actually seeing the experience for the experience. You're not experiencing the experience for the experience, but you're caught up in your thinking so much that you see the experience, and it's almost like you're looking at reality through a set of goggles and filters that is your mind. You're not actually seeing the sensory experience. You're not noticing the small details, but you're attached to the thinking, okay? And so that's the ego. And the way to let this go, how do you let go of unconsciously being absorbed into the thought processes? You become conscious of the thought processes where you can simply observe them. When I started to meditate every single day over 3 years ago, what I learned is that I can simply be the awareness of my thinking rather than unconsciously be absorbed into it. Stop creating an identification with my thoughts, but simply be the awareness. And then I started to notice these unconscious reactive patterns that were happening throughout my day. Not only reactive patterns, but then reactive patterns to the reactive patterns, which is a loop and a deep-rooted identity of trying to survive, not just survive physically, but mentally, because the ego wants to sustain itself and keep that identity alive. But the way to let go of that is to simply have the awareness. And sometimes fear might come up, sometimes agitation might come up, because there's going to be an urge to go back into the ego if you start doing something like a meditation habit, because you are conditioned to be attached to the thought processes. But what we're doing here is we're simply being the awareness of the ego rather than unconsciously identifying with it. But you got to understand that sometimes during this process of letting go of your ego, so to speak, which really just means observing the ego and disidentifying and detaching from it, which is where the true power comes. What we're doing here is we're just simply being the awareness, but you got to understand that there's going to be a pull to kind of go back there. There's going to be something called the ego backlash. So maybe you start meditating for a week, maybe you start meditating for 2 weeks, and then sometimes there's going to be a pull to go back to that old identity that you've created for yourself. But the key is to notice this and not feed into the urge. Don't feed into the unconscious energy, because sometimes there's going to be this urge to feed into that, which is the same urge that comes up when an argument comes up with somebody and you feel the need to feed into that, even though the deeper part of you doesn't want to argue, doesn't want to feed into arguments. The ego makes that pull happen. But then here's the real power, is when you can simply be the awareness of that pull to go back into the thinking. Because that's the next level to all of this. This goes in levels. Because at first, you just simply become the awareness of the thinking. Then you start to notice the awareness trying to go back into the thinking. So not only do you have, you notice that you are the awareness of the thinking, you also start to notice the awareness of the awareness trying to go back into the thinking. I'm going to say that one more time. You'll start to notice that not only you are the awareness of the thinking, but you will have awareness of the awareness going back into the thinking and noticing the urge and the pull that the ego is trying to, stay there. It's trying to stay in the thinking and stay alive, so to speak. So we're not killing the ego, we're just simply observing the ego, and then in the disidentification of the ego is the letting go, because you can't let go of something that you're not conscious of. So the first step to all of this is awareness, noticing the thought processes that you are unconsciously attached to, noticing the story that you tell yourself about who you think you are that is just playing on autopilot. But the first step here is the awareness, because a lot of channels talk about the law of attraction and how to rewrite your story, but I fully understand their perspective. I'm just going a little bit deeper and giving you the true root cause of how to rewrite your story. Because the way you rewrite your story in life and actually, connect that with something like the law of attraction is the awareness of the current story. And when I say story, I'm talking about unconscious thought processes, belief systems. What is a belief system? It's a thought that's repeated to yourself every single day. That's what a belief is. A belief is nothing more than a thought that is playing on a repeat. But if you're unconscious of that belief system, now you're dependent on that belief system. You're living on that belief system without realizing it. So literally, it's just about having awareness. It's just that simple. It's not very complicated here. But then when you're stuck in the ego, you don't necessarily understand what awareness is because you're so caught up in your head that awareness is nothing more than a concept to you. I tell you to be aware, you perceive that as another concept from the ego, which is an idea. The problem is that awareness is not an idea. Awareness is the thing that has the ability to perceive ideas to begin with. Awareness is not an idea. It's not a concept in your head. It might sound like that at first. You have to think about it to try to grasp it, but you can't grasp awareness. It's just simply the witnessing presence, the perceiver, the watcher, the observer of thinking. And you can tap into this part of yourself by doing things like meditation, where you can simply observe your thoughts rather than attach to them. And that is the beginning of true freedom in your life, where you can rewrite your story and become who you actually want to be. Because if you are attached to the ego, you can't actually become who you want to be. The awareness is the first step. And then so in the letting go of the ego, which is simply observing the ego is the letting go. In the observation and the awareness, the letting go will happen. In the letting go of the ego is also the letting go of anxiety, fear, worry, agitation, impatience, past trauma that you're holding on to. What is past trauma? It's unconsciously being attached to a thought where you bring up the past into the moment, and you're forced to relive the emotions of that past experience because you're unconsciously attached to it. That's what healing is. You want to heal yourself? Disidentify from the ego. That's true healing. This is what healing actually is. It's releasing internal resistance to thoughts. A lot of those thoughts are usually past thoughts that have already been finished, and people don't know how to let them go because they're attached to them unconsciously. And so they're forced to relive the past. They haven't completed the past. They haven't actually let go of the past because they're attached to it. And the way you let go of past trauma is simply by observing it and allowing it to be there. And when you're attached to past trauma, you don't want to allow it to be there because you're resisting it. But then what you don't understand, and what a lot of people don't know, is that in the awareness and the acceptance of the past trauma is the letting go of the trauma. And then in the letting go of the trauma is also letting go of the ego, so to speak, because the ego is what is attaching to the trauma. Now you can have true freedom in your life. Now you can rewrite the story and finally live the life that you want. Now you're in a position to use something like law of attraction. But if you're still unconsciously attached to that story, if you're still unconsciously attached to that past trauma, if you're still unconsciously attached to these thought processes, the law of attraction will never work and you're never going to live into your true potential. You can't live into your potential and create your vision if you're still attached to the past. You have to complete the past. You have to complete and let go of the past. But it's not as easy just to say to let it go. You have to have the awareness and understand the tools of how to do it. Okay, so that's all I have for you today. If you want to actually let go of the ego and detach from your thoughts, then just download the free guided meditation MP3 that's in the description box of this video. This will allow you to actually let go of the ego and detach from your thoughts and give you an experience of what it means, because it may just be a concept. So if you want to go, deeper into the experience, then just download that MP3 and see how it goes for you. And that's all I have for you today. If you like this kind of content, then consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell, because I post a new video every single day. Once again, if you want to become a private client, then just hit the website that's in the description box of this video and consider applying for a free consultation. That's all I have for you today. Have yourself a great day and see you in the next video.